I am absolutely delighted, and I can't tell you how delighted I am to have Katharine Birbalsingh here. I don't think she needs much or, well, any introduction, I suspect. We also have James Sibley. He's worked at the school for 7 years. He's now working on Catherine's new podcast, Strictly Education, which will be launched at the end of the summer. Strictly. Um, Thrown in there to wind some people up, perhaps. My name is Stuart Waiton. I'm the chairperson of the Scottish Union for Education. We were set up about 2.5 years ago. As you can see from our banner, our concerns were education in terms of educational standards and also what we see as indoctrination in schools, I'm a sociologist and my preoccupation is with what I describe as the new elites. So it is a particular preoccupation of mine. Anyway, it was parents and educationalists who set this up, which is academics and teachers. We're quite academic heavy at the minute, so we would like more teachers to get involved. We have a Substack, a newsletter. We hold events like this. And we're holding an event in Dundee in person, one of those things where you actually meet other people um, that you occasionally do, which is in the Queen's Hotel on Tuesday at 7 o'clock to discuss how we can change the education system in Scotland, which is a big ask. Um, and we're doing this in part because of the elections. So you have local elections in England. We have the Holyrood election, which is next Thursday, and our hope is to try and push education to the top of the political agenda, or as far up as we can make it. And so we have launched, or we are launching as you can see, uh, uh, our manifesto for education, which I will just read the little paragraph at the start, which says, the Scottish Union for Education believes our education system needs radical reform. We have a crisis in schools and colleges that won't be solved by rebranding quangos, changing ministers, or more breakfast clubs. What we really need is a major cultural shift to roll back the radical teaching reforms that have taken place over the last 2 decades. We need to return to a system which places knowledge at its heart, which is why this is, as far as I'm concerned, perfect, because we have Catherine and James here to discuss or explain how that is possible. At least I think that's what they will try and explain to us. So I will spend about 30 minutes, just ask a few questions, might not last that long. I'm very keen to get the audience involved. So after those 30 minutes, we'll bring the audience in and chat for another 30 or however long uh, before Catherine has to go and do her homework. Um, uh, as long as James and Catherine are happy to talk to you. Um, Okay, so I'm just going to kick off. My first question is ludicrously broad. Um, and as I was going to say, you could write a book on this. And then I thought, I bet she's written books. And of course, Catherine has either written or edited 3 books: The Power of Culture, Battle Hymn of the Tiger Teachers, and To Miss with Love, which I did not know. So I'm now going to have to get these books and read them as another injection of inspiration, hopefully, about what can be done. So my question is, how did you do it? There you go. A nice, easy, and I'll take either of you can just chip in, say as much or as little as you want, or you can say pass if it's a terrible question. So over to you.
When you say how did I do it, you mean set up Michaela and get Michaela to be successful?
Yes.
Right. Well, I mean, we've got, since 2010 in England, free schools. So you can apply to the Department for Education and set up your own school. I mean, I'm making it sound much easier than it is, but you have to go through a whole system. In the end, me and a bunch of people, we managed to, it took us 3.5 years. We got the building. There was a lot of difficulty in making it all happen, but we opened in 2014. And then, I mean, what you all would be most interested in, I suppose, is just how do you get any school really to make to as you said to have knowledge as the focus in the classrooms and really also discipline as well. You want the children to behave. And so really, I suppose you need people who have a bit more of a traditional or old-fashioned outlook on things, where they believe in sort of old-fashioned desks and rows facing the teacher, where the teacher would be the authority in the classroom and would lead the learning, where they believe that, because you're the authority, you're able to, tell children off, but also to praise them. So praise and punishment, to believe in giving them merits and demerits and giving them detentions and really holding the line, and that there should be consistency amongst the staff, and to sort of imagine that children can learn lots. Often I think we underestimate what children can learn. So it's, I suppose, finding Michaela has a lot of young teachers who are sort of a bit wide-eyed, thinking, well, we're going to make a real change and we can do this. And so if you can find them, and they're kind of keen to do things in a more old-fashioned way. The thing is, there are more old-fashioned teachers who are on the other end, who are much older. I find here in London, they're sort of retired already. It may be in Scotland, it might be different. You have some older teachers who are still in the, still out there working. Um, and also, obviously, there are teachers of all different ages in between. And when you sort of make it clear who you are and what you do, then you'll find, the whole idea of build it and they will come. People will eventually just start coming because they'll recognize the things that you're saying. People often will say to me, they might come up to me in the street or they write to me on Twitter or whatever. They send emails to the school just saying, oh, thank goodness you're saying something. I always thought like you, but I thought maybe I was going mad, but you've now said it, and that means that I'm not mad. So, I think you just need to you keep going with what you believe is right, and then others will find you. And you obviously then need to deliver. So you need to get people on board with doing what works really. And that does mean getting practitioners who have some experience, because I do think sometimes people can get involved in setting up schools who really don't know because they've never really been in education. And then they can be surprised when they find out how difficult it is, because it is really hard to teach. And I think it's really hard to run a school well, in particular in 2026, because the culture outside is so different to the culture that works in schools. In 1955, for instance, it was a lot easier to run a school because you were just teaching the children values that were kind of commonplace. Nowadays, it's much more difficult because you're going against the grain. So then you really need to find people who might think like you, or at least willing to change their minds and come with you. And then, you've got to tick all the normal boxes, the inspectorate, and satisfy so many different ideas and demands. But in the end, I suppose the families and the children will recognize that what you're doing is making their children better and better educated, better people, and they'll buy into what you're offering. So I think that's what I found. James, did you want to add anything to that?
I suppose, like from my point of view, like the first time, because you're obviously telling the story from you setting up the school from scratch kind of thing. I first visited the school when it had existed for 3.5 years. And what was interesting is I had never really seen a lesson or be trained to teach a lesson the way that Katharine and her staff sort of train people to teach. And one of the consequences is you sort of, before I'd gone into the room, there's a kind of, it's almost like a before Michaela, after Michaela experience, like BCAD, because before I'd gone in, you imagine teaching a certain way and you think, well, this is how it has to be. And then it's only after you've gone, hold on a sec, I'm looking at this classroom and I'm saying this classroom very clearly works and the children are happier, they're safer and they're learning. And that's what kind of helped Catherine then change your mind. You go in as a teacher and you think, no, you know what, I am going to reevaluate some preconceived ideas about the profession because I believe this is something that's amazing for the kids and it could help me as someone to help the kids. And I think the only thing I would add in to what you said, Catherine, is just like, I think, the second book, The Power of Culture, I mean, it's to do with the staff have to all embody a set of values and culture about what you believe. That's the reason why the kids feel that consistency and that credibility. And it's believing that it's worth moving people in how they think about the profession. That was something I benefited from just like profoundly. And not just assuming it's about going, oh, it's almost like going to the supermarket. You find your teacher on this shelf and this one on this shelf. You have to really move people to join a team and to be led, and not to be sycophantic. But I would say that is one of the most transformative things that people really struggle to understand, is sort of the power of all that. I don't know if that makes sense, Catherine, but
Yep.
feel free to clarify or add if it doesn't.
Yeah, well, can I just run with that then? Because this is so when I try and think about the imagine setting up a school and what should schools be and so on, the question of kind of values and ethos is something that I'm a bit defensive about. And I suppose I'm defensive about it a little bit because I think, well, if I say we're going to have a set of values that aren't just purely educational, then can people not just say, well, that's indoctrination, right? So you're saying, I say I'm worried about indoctrination in schools, by which I mean all sorts of kind of progressive, woke, whatever it is, right? Whether it's trans or race or, sustainability and, the way history's taught and so on. And say, well, so I suppose my question is, what are your values? And if someone said, isn't that indoctrination? What would you say so that I can then say it?
Well, what I would say is that you're always forming children in some way or another. Um, there's some set of values. There's always a set of values that are forming the children or in your care. It's just a question of which values you want to choose. So you could choose woke values. You could choose um, some less woke values that are more progressive. You could choose some traditional values. So we've chosen traditional values, and I find that children really thrive with those more traditional values. And I would say, these days, unfortunately, there are a lot of people on the left politically who have abandoned those values. But I have to say, there are still people on the left who are in classrooms right now who would agree with what I'm saying with these sorts of values. Things like it's important to teach children gratitude. If you don't teach them gratitude for what you're doing for them, both parents and teachers, then children will take you for granted, and they just the natural human state is to be quite selfish, and unless someone teaches the child not to be selfish and to be grateful to those people around them who are helping them, they just won't do it. I have to say, lots of progressives upon hearing that would think, oh yeah, actually I like that. Kindness, we don't really want children to be unkind to each other or unkind to their teachers, and we see that far too often in schools where teachers are told to F off, or they won't do what the teachers ask, they don't recognize the teacher's authority, and then they can be very horrible to each other. Do we really want the shyer children or the ones who are smaller being bullied? So again, I think a progressive would say, "Oh yes, no, I agree with that idea of kindness." If I were to put forward the old-fashioned value of personal responsibility, that you're responsible for doing your homework, you're responsible for turning up on time. It's not good to just give excuses all the time and to see yourself as a victim. Um, I think, when you put it like that, I think that lots of progressives would say, well, of course, we want them to do their homework. Absolutely. They should be turning up on time. And of course, they're responsible. It's not their brother's fault. It's not the bus's fault. It's their responsibility. I think lots of progressives would say, yes, of course, I agree with it. Now, when they start to branch off, is when it's put in a different way. You see, because if I were to say, well, and so that means really we shouldn't all be saying that it's that it's racism that's at fault, or it's the the discussion around gender that's at fault. This child feels that he's questioning his gender. That's why he's late to school, or that's why he wasn't able to do his homework, or he's comes from a poor home, therefore he wasn't able to do his homework. Or actually he's struggling with special needs or his mental health, therefore he wasn't able to do his homework. So once you bring in the excuse, then that's where the more progressive person goes, oh, no, 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 we do like victimhood. We do like the idea of rejecting personal responsibility. But if you just have the talk around personal responsibility, a progressive will tend to say, oh, I do believe in that. Of course they should do their homework. And then, just the idea of duty towards others, in our school, be very much, if you get a detention, you're not just letting yourself down, you're letting the others in your form group down. Again, I think a progressive would think, yeah, you are letting the form group down. It's true. It's annoying for the rest of the kids to be disrupted by your poor behavior. Again, I think a progressive would understand that. I think the idea of sacrificing something that's important for you, for the sake of the whole form, for the sake of the whole year group, for the sake of the whole school, and putting others before yourself. Again, I think a progressive would say, oh no, I agree with that. It's just that when all of these values are put in the context of um, of uh, the kind of woke ideology that's out there, I think that's when you really expose the sort of indoctrination that because then you think, well, you agree with all of these values in theory, but then when you put it in a woke world, suddenly you're going, oh no, 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 I don't like these values. But the reason you agree with them in theory is that you all in growing up were immersed in those values yourselves. And
Mm.
so it all feels very familiar and it feels like, well, this sounds right. But then when you put it in the context of the woke world, you sort of go, oh gosh. And then I want to suggest to them, well, maybe you're the one that's been indoctrinated because you seem to agree with me up until then. And then when I now put it into the woke world view, you think, oh gosh, no, I don't like this, even though you liked it a moment ago. That's probably what I would say to somebody if I was talking to them.
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, what's really interesting is that I did not expect you to start with gratitude. That had never entered my imagination. And kindness, because it's a kind of, to use the term woke, as we are using it, it's a kind of cliche of woke schools, is that they're all about being kind.
Well, I'm
Um,
not sure they are.
yeah,
I think they would
okay.
say something about being sort of nice and in a performative kind of way, to appear to be nice, as opposed to actively choosing to be kind by doing various actions, being part of your life, giving up your seat on the bus, ringing up your grandmother and spending time talking to her when actually you've got a million things to do. Thanking your mum for the meal that she's just made for you and offering to do the washing up. That sort of thing is an active act of kindness, as opposed to just being a generally sort of, wishy-washy, oh, I'm a nice person. Well, what does that mean? Everybody wants to be a nice person, but it doesn't really mean anything. James,
Yeah,
do you want to add anything to what I've said?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a fair question to go. Isn't sort of kindness and compassion, and sort of thinking of other people, isn't that kind of a bedrock of what people criticize in kind of maybe modern leftist ideological thinking? I just think there's a very profound difference between, as Catherine said, like teaching people to do things that give them no benefit, no advantage, but they're the sort of small rituals of sacrifice that show you're part of a community and that you actually care about other people, and that actually generally call you to do quite difficult things sometimes, candidly. And I would include that in teachers. Like, the compassionate thing to do as a teacher when you're teaching a kid where there's some naughty kids in there is actually, unfortunately, even if you don't love it, to be the authority authority so that all kids are safe, all kids learn. Now, that won't confer you a social benefit if the teacher next door to you thinks how awful you are having these kind of rules and these consequences. And that's where you know you're dealing with something that's maybe not real compassion, because what you're dealing with, it confers you a political and social benefit. You know, you're doing something which gives you the appearance of decency amongst your peers, that then gives you value by saying, did you know I'm extremely benign and enlightened in this way or in this way? And I think that, yeah, it's true. Work hard, be kind is the school motto. But the kind that we're talking about is, you know, you should tidy up your lunch table so the dinner lady doesn't go home 15 minutes later to see her son because you care about other people. Well, you know what? You're not putting that on Instagram. Like, you're not getting to boast about that, and no one's gonna be like, oh, you're so cool. The girls are gonna want to date you. You tidy up after yourself. But ultimately, that's what real decency looks like, where you're like, look, I got to be decent and I got to be sound here. I've got to show some respect for other people, that I live in a community where I owe something to others in some sense before myself. And if I can come back to your previous question, I think that it gets to the heart of where our value system is very different from the value system that you're perhaps scared of, maybe moving towards. It sort of sounds like an indoctrination war, which is that one is like the values that are morally formative for a dignified life. Okay, so like if I were to push Katharine, I don't know, Katharine, we haven't spoken about this, but if I was to be like, why those values, why those values, why those values, I think at its heart, if I had to give a guess, I would say what is conducive to individual and collective dignity. Katharine, you can correct me if you don't agree with that. What gives us a dignified life, you know, is when our boys and our girls become husbands, wives, daughters, you know, whatever it may be, they go on to do. That's very different from the idea of I am preparing you for a political purpose. You know, I'm preparing you for a political purpose that I have decided will rectify the wrongs I've concluded are true of my predecessors, which therefore align with my supposed agenda. Like, that's super different. You know, our values are basically saying, you got a young working class boy from Harlesden. I want him to be a good husband if he gets married, and I want him to be a really good employee. So the shop he works in is a nice shop in town, or if he goes to university, he's a really good student. He runs a business, he's a good boss. Wherever he ends up, I want dignity for him and for the others. That's a very different vocabulary from, I really hope he votes Labour to take down capitalism. You know what I mean? Like, when you actually unpick, where this is the classic thing, we're using specific terms, compassion, kindness, values, that what they are actually describing in the life of a child, we've diverged so considerably that it takes a good 10 minutes to then unpack and go, hold on. We're speaking different dialects, you know? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. And it's one of the things I'm really keen on is revitalizing words like dignity, right? Because being dignified is a word that it's, you know, there's these words like duty is another one. I'm sure you could do an Ngram's word search and you'll see these words are just drifting out of use and have been for the last 50 years or so. And being dignified, I think, is an absolutely fantastic word. And it reminds me, when Catherine was talking there, reminds me I was talking to my daughter. My daughter's smart. Um, and we were talking about kindness and being caring. And she said she's 24-ish now. He says, bad dad. She said, yeah, she says, really annoys me all these people who say that they're caring and kind, and it's like a political affectation. And she says that what's frustrating to me is that she does caring. So, like, if we visit my mother who's not well, my daughter is a brilliant carer. She cares. She actually does stuff for people and is actively, as you were saying, if you're on a bus, give up your seat and so on. And I think it's very true that the difference between, I think, what your values are and what the problematic values are, is your values are social and communal. And I think the modern values are, as you suggest, much more victims focused and narcissistic. And that is one of my preoccupations, is the institutionalization of narcissism, which is what I think the education system is doing at the minute. But anyway, right, I've got another question. Teaching something like history can be seen as problematic because it could be used to promote nationalism, for example. How do you think about this issue?
But I think we need to distinguish between patriotism and nationalism. You know, being patriotic is a good thing. When you're a nationalist, and there's a sense of being superior to other countries, when you're patriotic, it's just the sense of, well, we belong to our country and this is our country and we're very proud of our country, but we're also critical of our country and wanting to make it better. But we commit to something that is bigger than us, So it's the same with being part of the school, for instance. They commit to being a member of Michaela. They commit to being a member of Britain. If you're not a member of your country, then you're just someone who's, well, you're just a bit of a passenger. You're sitting there taking up some space for a while and then moving on somewhere else, as opposed to wanting to contribute. The point of a life and a dignified life, as James was just saying, is you're able to contribute to the country to make it better. If you're not part of the country, then you're not able to contribute, and therefore you're not able to live a dignified life. I mean, living a dignified life is entirely wrapped up in very much feeling as if you belong to the country and you're part of a team. You're not just an individual floating through life, just taking things for your own benefit, and just thinking about you all the time and looking through a selfish lens. You're imagining what you can do for your country to make it into a better country. And that can come in all kinds of ways. I'm not saying everyone has to be a teacher or a social worker. It might be that you have a family and you bring up your family really well, and you ensure that your children are the kinds of people you can be proud of when they're older. It might be that you go into some field where you're earning lots of money, but you give lots of money to charity in some way, and you do some work in the soup kitchen on a Sunday or whatever it is. I mean, there's a whole variety of ways in which is the point that you can contribute, but there needs to be some sense of a love of country in doing that, because you're contributing to something, to the country that is bigger than you. Yeah, I think it's absolutely necessary for that. The possibility of living a dignified life. And I think that our fear of nationalism is to imagine that people cannot be nuanced and they cannot think through things. I mean, we're not all dumbos. We're able to be part of the country, to recognize, for instance, I don't know, some of the wonderful things that Britain did in the past and some of the ways in which Britain did not do great things. And then we can be critical of Britain in that way. If there's no such thing as Britain, then how can you hold anybody to account? How can you hold, there are no standards, nothing, meaning comes within the country, and it's something to belong to. There is a national character. There is a national, you go somewhere else. Oh, Britain, they queue a lot, don't they? Oh, it really rains a lot, doesn't it? Oh, you've got Mr. Bean or whatever it is, that you eat baked beans, don't you? Oh my goodness, wow, and it's just, these are things that make for Britain, and how lovely that we should be part of that and that we should feel proud of it, really. James, did you want to add?
Yeah, just a few things. I mean, I am a history teacher, so I'm familiar with the direction of travel of the argument. I think, like, just on the very specifics of, a bit of a warning about a kind of maybe a knowledge-based history curriculum, and you'll be, doing sort of various sociological things. You'll be aware that the concern is obviously you're giving a body of knowledge that is supposed to make people think a certain way, to be sort of, explicitly nationalist and patriotic, all of that stuff. I think the first thing is that, like, the conversation often ends up using a historic problem of basically the way schools were in the 1930s or 40s with sort of pink maps of empire to justify a present political position. Like, I've never seen a school where you go in and you think, my goodness, this history department is turning everyone into thinking that there's not a flaw in their country. I mean, if someone's found one, they can tell me, but I've seen a lot of the opposite. And I think sometimes it's used as a bit of a vehicle to be like, well, we all agree that the 1920s isn't what we should be doing. Great. Conversation over. I'm now going to go and teach this unit on how, like, we should actually understand Mary Queen of Scots through a feminist lens. And I'm like, okay, hold on, because you're just sort of using the devil figure over there to go, none of us want to do this, to then say, great, on with the show, let's do this. And then the second thing is that there's a big fear of, how should you be teaching kids to love their country? Well, probably in the same way you should want kids. Your love of country is not the same as saying my country is perfect. It's like loving your family. Everybody knows your family has problems. The point is that it's your family. Like that, the point is it's your thing to go, yeah, it's got good, it's got bad, it's mine. I'm a steward of what came before. And that's both a body of knowledge, but also a kind of, I guess, a moral responsibility to say, I now have to preserve the things that we know are good, both culture, history, knowledge, etc. But I also have to then pass that on to the next generation. And if there are things that I look at honestly and go, aren't good, then I should, as you do within a family, you sort of seek to be like, well, I'll do my best to contribute where I can. Whereas instead, what we do, we're kind of back to the education, the politicization of education. Instead, you basically, this is used as an excuse to traduce the country sometimes, and then to therefore say, right, so do we all agree the only answer is a set series of maybe political solutions? Like I don't know the schools where we'd say, my words, look at the patriotism. Like we all teach the slave trade, we all teach the awfulness of empire. It's been a long time since you've had schools where they'd say, they would completely gloss over all of that. My worry is kids know little else. I don't know, Catherine, if you'd agree with that, but that would be where I'm at on that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. Definitely everything James says is absolutely true. And it's odd because we're actually being far too damning of the country, and yet people paint this picture as if we're pretending that the country is perfect. I mean, I've never seen that either. No one's ever seen that. It's ridiculous. It's
Yeah.
made up, really. It's just a lie.
Yeah, there's so many of these things where it's the world turned upside down in reality. But yeah, I mean, I think all James has to do is he has to come up to Scotland, change the policy so that we're having free schools, and set up a similar school in one of the major cities. That's your job after this. Anyway, next
Well,
final. This is my final
well,
question.
before you say,
Yeah.
I should just say James is in Scotland. He's in Scotland right now. It's where he lives. He
Oh, he's,
lives in Scotland and is
uh,
planning on setting up a school in Scotland, which would be a mirror of Michaela.
oh,
I think that flatters me and is a massive overpromise, Catherine. But yeah, I'm
right.
in Ayr. That's true. I live in Ayr. Yeah.
Right. Okay. That is interesting. I'm going to leave that to the punters to ask you about that because that is very interesting. Right. Okay. This is my last question. So at this point, uh, audience, if you want to ask a question or say something, stick your hand up. You do that by moving your hand onto the reactions, and at reactions, there's a little raised hand, and we'll see little yellow hands. I will bring 3 or 4 people in, depending on how many people put their hands up. You can all ask your questions together, one after the other, and then James and Catherine can answer whichever the ones that they think are most appropriate to answer. But anyway, this is my last question. What are the main problems you see in education in general? So I'm going to throw out a few that I see. One is teacher training, which, as far as I can see, just about everything you have said is not what happens in teacher training here. Another is expectations, as in low. And another one, which you may or may not want to touch on, is what's called the mental health crisis, which I would repose and say the crisis of giving all children a mental health label. Anyway, they're my concerns. What do you think are the biggest problems in education?
Yes, well, I think you're right in what you've just said. I would say on the mental health front, there are some genuine issues around mental health, but I think that's caused by tech. Jonathan Haidt's written a great book, The Anxious Generation, on all of this, where he's basically got all the data to prove what I see anecdotally and what James sees anecdotally. There is a reason why there's been such a spike in mental health problems since 2015 onwards. That is because of access to unsupervised, access to the internet, and children are put under huge amounts of stress by doing that. But yes, it's then blossomed into a sort of another way of claiming victimhood. So we spoke about the idea of victimhood. That's just become the kind of culture now that everyone needs a sort of victim card to play, whether it's mental health or special needs or being of a different race or being of a different religion or being poor or whatever it is. And personal responsibility has sort of gone out the window. And that's not to say what I always say to people who sort of say, oh gosh, that all sounds a bit harsh. I always say, well, look, I'm not saying that life is fair. I'm not saying that we're all, we all start from an equal position. I recognize we don't start from an equal position. Clearly, the children at Michaela are not going to have the same advantages as the kids who go to Eton. But that sort of doesn't matter. You've only got one life to live. You've got one set of cards to play, and you need to play them. And you need to do your best to overcome the various obstacles that might be in front of you. And it might be that you have a special need. It might be that, you come from a household where life has been more challenging. You maybe financially, maybe your parents haven't been as supportive as you would have liked, or whatever the reasons are. But it sort of doesn't matter. You've got to take the bull by the horns and do something with your life. So I would say that's a huge problem in education, and that unfortunately the education system often and teachers often indulge children in this way of thinking. But all the things you said there, low expectations, we don't realize how much children can learn. All of the people on the call, you're all very welcome to come and visit us in London. If you're in London, all you need to do is sign up on the website, and then we'll book you in for days that would suit you, and you come and have lunch with the kids and a tour. And when you go round the school, we get 1,000 visitors every year from all around the country, some all over the world, but mainly around the country, mainly teachers who come to see what we do. And all of them they just can't believe it, And every day I speak to the guests and they say, how have you done this? How is it possible? Because the children are very polite and they know so much. I mean, the thing that people say, well, how do they know all of this? And I say, well, because it's actually possible for children to know a lot. It's just that the low expectations are such that we're so used to children hardly knowing anything, we don't really expect very much of them, when in fact they can learn so much. And the teacher training institutions, yes, well, they're a massive problem because they teach everybody to do all the wrong things. So we have to sort of undo all of the work of the teacher, the training institutions. And when people come to teach with us, try and teach them, well, we say, forget everything you've learned, do it this way now. So it's a big job for anyone trying to kind of do things differently, because you have to go against the grain. And it does require sort of leaders to be quite courageous in standing up to the status quo and saying, no, 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 we're going to do it differently. And people are going to hate you for it. But you just kind of you've got to find that in yourselves to be able to do it. And, these days, the culture of poor behavior where children misbehave and everyone thinks that that's normal, and it's not normal. Children can behave really well and they can learn loads and they can be good people, but they have to be taught to be good. That's the thing. And I think, once on Twitter, I mentioned the idea of original sin and, just the idea that we're all flawed. And everyone went mad saying, oh my goodness, you can't talk about original sin. And I said, well, I'm just saying I'd rather eat the chocolate cake than eat the broccoli. I'd rather, sit on the sofa than go to the gym. That's all I'm saying. I mean, and maybe there are people out there who actually prefer going to the gym. They were born like that. I've never met them. I tend to find that you have to teach yourself to be that kind of person. And that's because it is just much easier to be selfish. It's much easier to be lazy. It's much easier to be just all the things that make human beings more indulgent of what they want rather than going out and doing good. It's much easier. So that's why we have to teach our children not to do that. If you put two toddlers in a room with one toy, you can be sure that somebody's going to get whacked on the head. In fact, both of them will get whacked, not by each other, obviously. I mean, like that. That's just what toddlers do, and we have to teach them to do otherwise. It's not the case that the toddler looks at the other one and says, "Shall we share?" I mean, unless someone has taught them, right? So. And anyone who's brought up children sort of knows. You spent time around children. We all know this, but we've sort of forgotten because we feel like we're bad people if we hold children to account. But I would argue it's quite the opposite. We're bad people when we don't hold them to account. We're bad people when we don't help them become the kinds of adults that they could be, really. So yeah, James, I don't know if you want to add.
I mean, I agree with everything you said. I think just in the Scotland specific, just to give a bit of I think a bit of a I've only got one thing I would add for the Scotland specific context, which is just a bit of a defence actually, that I think the structure of schools in Scotland makes being a head teacher or any school leader extraordinarily difficult, because to have the bravery Catherine speaking about, go, you know what? Okay, it might need be what everyone else thinks. Here are the values I genuinely believe are going to give children the a dignified life, and I'm going to try and move my people, and I'm going to try and make them see things that way. That's really, really hard if you've got, if the things you're being held accountable to, a local council, the appointment for education doesn't hold the same position as you, and where they also themselves have a different incentive. They're responding to different things from government. And then you're dealing with also taking on probationers, and you don't always, you get given them from central government, and they might be great or whatever it may be. It could be a mixed bag. But the ability to say, these are my core beliefs, this is the culture we're going to lead on, this is what I think will do right for the children. I can see there's some challenges. Here's how I'm going to lead on doing right by them. And there are obviously, my mum was a teacher her whole career here. Like, there are really amazing people doing amazing things. There is a sense in which we're not giving head teachers the ability to show. There's a limitation there for a lot of them that means what you end up with is a kind of homogenizing force that, where Catherine's talking about a set of values that 1970s Scotland had. You could go to a council estate in Wallistown or in Shortleys, Kilmarnock, or whatever it may be. There will have been large numbers of people who would have had these kind of values where they might not have had a lot of money in their house or driven a nice car or even had a car, but there would have been a core set of values that they would go, they would really hold to. And so in Scotland's previously uniform education system, you could see some extraordinary things done because the prevailing ethos of what people believed in was pretty shared. But when you've moved away from that, it does mean you can lock in some ideas that actually are not necessarily conducive to what you want to do for the kids, to do right by the kids. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I will now bring in the first three punters. So Simon, Fatini, and Stephen, I'm adding you in the spotlight. So Simon, ask your question.
Hi. No, really, really interesting. I'm based in Glasgow, and I'm interested in this culture shock thing that you've been talking about, and you've gone some way to answering in the last kind of few minutes. My job involves me going into schools and changing school cultures around different things. I go into primary schools, and we look at non-curricular play. And there's a whole debate around there. I don't want to get into it because there'll be different opinions here. But I have to work to change the school culture, and it's slightly easier because I'm invited in, and schools are paid for my services. So there's a willingness to begin with. But it is changing culture. And quite often when you start, you get a lot of people within the school staff compliment or say, oh, they call me son. I'm 60, nearly 61, and they still call me son. And they say, oh, it'll never work here, because people think that their school is somehow differently. The children that attend their school are somehow different to all other children in the entire universe. So I'm interested for you just to kind of go in a little bit further about, because it's not just that you're driving down the wrong side of the road and going a different way to the rest of the world. You're trying to put a horse, I'm mixing my metaphors here, but you're trying to put a horse back in its box after it's well and true. It bolted 30 years ago. So you're not just driving against the traffic, you're trying to find horses both in terms of children and staff. And the way I present it is that quite often schools are so busy firefighting that they can't do fire prevention. And if you could just devote some of your time to fire prevention, then you'd actually have less fires to put out. So there's a huge number of metaphors there, but it's a hard job to change culture within a school. And just, do you just have to be really bloody minded? Do you have to just walk on water, I suppose, and do it that way? Or are there other tricks of the trade that you deployed?
Yes,
Okay,
to some
okay,
extent.
don't answer that. I'm going to bring in Stephen and Fatini, and then you can answer all three together because we'll take forever. Fatini, you haven't unmuted yet, so there you go. Go on.
Hello, Stuart. Hello, Catherine. Thank you, first of all. I've been admiring your work for a long time. It's very nice to meet you.
Yes.
And the other thing I'll say to Stuart, maybe he forgot, we do have a traditional school in Edinburgh. very similar in many ways to Michaela, and we can see a lot of the benefits academically and also socially. I was hoping you could tell us something, a debate that we're having at our little school that we have, about the importance of uniform and what role you think that plays. And I also heard a rumor that you're setting up some sort of teacher training. So I'd like to hear more about that.
Okay.
Right. Okay. So it's Fatini who set up this school in Edinburgh, in case that wasn't clear. Stephen.
Stephen is one of my teachers.
Hello, yes. Thank you. I also, yes, I suppose you said I work at the Edinburgh Classical School. And yeah, thank you for this conversation. I'm glad to speak to you, Catherine, and James. Yes, my question is, how would you give advice regarding adapting the Michaela method to a primary school setting? Or another way of phrasing that, maybe, which parts of the Michaela method would you see as essential to forming a successful primary school, at a particularly primary school setting rather than a secondary school setting?
Okay. Right. So you can answer any or all. Catherine.
Yeah, well, I would say, yeah, you do need to be bloody-minded and so on, but in order to make changes, but I would always say that you should change one thing at a time and no more than one, because it's hard for people to make changes, and that might be uniform, for instance. So, uniform is a good place to start, and to make sure the uniform is perfect, because when you make uniform perfect, you'd be amazed at how behavior changes. The whole broken windows theory. You look after the small things, the big things take care of themselves. So uniform is extremely important. Now, of course, if you don't have a uniform, then that's different. So, but if you do have a uniform, you can't let them wear it badly, because then that means the first rule you've given them, which is to have their ties to the top, shirts tucked in, and so on, or whatever it is about the uniform, you then say, I know I said that you need to wear a uniform properly, but it's okay. I'm not going to do anything about it when you don't. So that means your word is utterly meaningless. And when you ask them to get their homework in and ask them to do anything, they'll never take you seriously. So it is so important, if you have a uniform, that you make sure that those rules are held tightly. And most schools do have uniforms, and most schools don't really pay any attention to the uniform. They need to kind of explain to everybody, this is what's happening on May the 5th. This is the day everything's going to change. We're going to send you home if you don't have your uniform looking like this. You've told the parents, you've told everyone. I did that once in the school in South London when I was assistant head there. And, I sent home, I don't know, 100 kids on the first day. I mean, there were loads. I mean, and you just send them home and then you send them home again. And actually, by the third day, everybody was wearing their uniform correctly. And within 6 weeks, the whole school had transformed. We used to have fights happening in lessons. We would have fire alarms being pulled by the kids 2 or 3 times a week. All of that stopped just because I dealt with uniform. So that's where I would say to start. And in terms of primary schools, I'd say it's exactly the same with the primary school. I went to visit a school in Wales once where they were doing exactly the same as what we do at Michaela. You had the little 3-year-olds who were all walking around in silence with their fingers across their lips like this, and the teacher would go, shh, and all the children would go, shh. And it was just great. It was exactly like Michaela, except they were 3 and 4 and 5 and 6, I mean, it was the same. So, I just think all that we do would work with children of any type, any age, any country. It doesn't matter. Kids are kids, and they need order and structure and discipline. And then there was another thing, Fatina, that you asked. What was it? Training. Well, you've probably just perhaps heard. I mean, we were saying that we're working on a podcast, which is going to be launched soon, and then next year I'm hoping to one of my staff to create a kind of manual on sort of how to copy Michaela. So that will come out, and then that kind of coupled with the podcast, which you're all very welcome to follow when it does come out. Strictly Education, it's called. It'll be on YouTube. Just listening to the podcast and then following along with the manual, and watching the videos that'll go along with the manual, and the videos will be taken of the things that are happening at Michaela. I think that should be really helpful if you want to take some of the ideas of Michaela and introduce them in your school.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much. If you guys can mute yourselves, and I will get rid of you. If you do excuse me. and bring in the next three. So Donica and Hugo and Margaret. I think Penny had a hand up, but it's gone back down. So you should put your hand back up. Anyway, Donica, on you go.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Katharine and James, for sharing your time with us this evening. It's just a simple question. What do you see the role of the parent in relation to the school?
Oh, right. Okay. Nice and short. That's good. Perfect. Hugo.
Yes, I just want to say, first of all, that I read recently The Power of Culture, and I found it very inspiring and very stimulating. But my question is the authoritative approach to teaching and the desks in rows and so on that you talked of at the inception of this evening. How young can you start that? Is it from reception, from year one, or is it really something that's more appropriate to secondary schools?
Okay. And Margaret, I don't know if you can put your camera on. I can't spotlight you because you're not there. But anyway, oh, there you go.
Hi.
I can now spotlight you. There we go. Okay.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm also putting children to bed, so that's why my camera's been off. Thank you so much for all that's been shared. Fully agree with everything that's been said. Love the mention of original sin. I'm a teacher in a Christian school in Glasgow, very small independent school, running on the fumes of grace because the government gives us no money. But I'm glad someone else asked the question about parent participation because I'm really keen to hear that as well. But the other thing that was burning for me is touching on what you mentioned there, James, about the pressures that head teachers are under. The standards for middle leadership and headship in Scotland, just to sign up to the GTCS standards, requires you to either be very sneaky with your interpretation of certain words or to just upfront sign up to something that you don't agree with unless you hold to progressive values. I have in mind, for example, the idea of teaching for sustainability. Now, you can interpret that in a way that maybe aligns with your values should you choose to, but it's clear that there's an agenda behind that is kind of just filtering out lots of excellent teachers who maybe aren't comfortable even signing up to that in any which way. So in the Scotland context, even those of us who agree with you, we are under a really tight set of regulations with GTCS. And in what way is that vulnerability a unique challenge to Scotland compared to England? Because I don't have an English perspective on this. And what do you think the best way is for us to tackle that? Thank you.
Great. Okay. James or Katharine? Amazing.
Well, James, do you want to answer that last one?
The one from Margaret. Is this Melville Knox by any chance? Oh, she's got. I just
Oh, right.
Right, she's giving me thumbs up. Okay,
Right.
I'm in the right space. Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question, and I think definitely a concern a lot of people have, in particular, depending on your what real values you hold is extremely kind of red lines for you, and there will be some teachers for whom they're the things you have to do. So, Katharine, just for context, to be a head teacher legally in the state system, you have to have done a qualification called, I think, into headship, they now call it. And as part of that, it's a lot of it, and this is where values, this is why, Stuart, it sends shivers down your spine to hear the word values, is a lot of it is sort of ethos driven, but maybe around values which Katharine wouldn't say are conducive to good leadership or the dignity that we're referring to. Yeah, that's a massive problem. Now, I would need to know more about the specifics. I don't know exactly what people study on into headship. And the reality is I'm probably not a great person to ask because I am also doing the thing of seeing how can I set up a low-cost Christian school that I believe reflects a set of values that I think would do right by children. And so I'm not, in a way, I probably maybe reflect some of your frustrations, possibly more so than somebody who says, look, I'm within the system and I'm doing this really good thing within the system. And I don't want to say to them they're not, because they obviously, there'll be loads of people who are. I don't really have anything else to add to that in the Scotland specific context. The GTCS are very, they wouldn't give me full registration and said I had to be a probationer again. So I had to do unpaid teaching and stuff to be able to be given that, because they're since 2023, they're stringent that even if you're trained outside Scotland, you need to have been going through a certain system, which when you've got a teacher shortage, that's a very odd thing to do, to sort of say, I don't want people coming here from outside, essentially. So it is an issue. I don't have anything inspiring to say. Yeah. Catherine.
Yeah. So Hugo, you're right. Thank you, Hugo, for forcing me to clarify, actually, because when I say, well, look, primary school should be just a copy of Michaela, I mean really in terms of ethos and the idea of knowledge and so on. But when I think about the school in Wales, of course, it's adapted to a primary setting. So when I say all the children were going shh, I mean, that's the difference. For instance, when we are silent in the corridors, we're not saying to 15-year-olds, shh, we're not doing that. They were doing that with 3-year-olds. But while we're sat at desks in rows in the primary school there, they were all, right through, I suppose, to about year 4, they all had carpets and they were sat on the carpet, but the carpet had a little bug on the carpet, in the carpet. So they had a seating plan on the carpet, as it were. So there was a seating plan. It was just sat down. So there were changes to fit the primary context and to fit, frankly, what is it, early years? Is it later on in primary and so on? But I just meant overall the same idea of ethos could transfer very easily. And then yes, the idea of parents. Well, my heart always goes out to parents who are more traditional, who are sending their children to local schools, because it's very hard to sort of keep your child on the straight and narrow when the school might be encouraging them to be otherwise. What I would say is that parents really shouldn't just trust the school 100%. They should be thinking when they bring their homework home, well, is this the right amount of homework? Is it on the right sorts of stuff? Should I go to the local bookshop and see if there are supportive books to help my child at home? How am I going to make sure that I inoculate my child against some of the stuff he might pick up at school? In terms of that might be against the sorts of values that I would want to instill in my child. That's how I think parents need to be thinking. And in terms of, parents need to do their best to try and find a school that most matches their values. And then understand that the school is not going to be exactly what they want, and to try and do what they can as a family in terms of teaching their children the sort of subjects, but also just instilling the right sorts of values in their child. Because in 1995, you could just send your child to school and not really think about it. In 2026, you really got to be quite careful about what you're exposing your child to. Certainly not allowing them online. Being very, very careful, because often parents don't notice until it's too late and their child is gone. And when I say gone, they're not physically gone, but mentally, and their hearts and souls have gone somewhere else. And it's very hard to get them back.
Great. Okay. Right. This is our final 3, and that's quite good timing, I think. Stuart.
I'm just going to check. Are you hearing me okay?
Yes.
I have occasional mic issues. Catherine, that's fantastic. I'm a teacher in the south side of Glasgow, so if James wants an update on the Curriculum for Excellence, the most despicable, value-laden and terrible curriculum in the world, then feel free to give us a call. Although you've been in Ayr, creates an issue because I'm from Kilmarnock, so let's hope the local rivalry will not. Yeah, I thought it's not going to work, is it? You might have the sea, but we've got the Dean Park. One of the
I'm a season
aspects
ticket holder at Somerset. I'm not enjoying this. Sorry, go on, Stuart.
Local rivalry. Catherine, when people think about Michaela and the way you've described it there, obviously fantastic in terms of the knowledge you're offering the children, the opportunity for them to grow in that respect. That's why the socialisation and the values that you're giving them. But at the same time, there could be an aspect where the growth of the child, and this is not necessarily from a progressive sense, but from a social sense, could be misinterpreted as you're basically producing an army of similar kids with held the same values. They're all passing their GCSE woodwork or equivalent. So how do you factor in the growth of the individual and about their growth in terms of leaving school, being able to act in their community as individuals? Or is that not important?
A loaded
Just
question.
laughing.
Okay, fine, Jenny.
I'm sort of interested really in how children bring into Michaela or any, old-fashioned school, how they bring some of this woke stuff in, because they must be aware of it, they must be influenced, presumably they have peers around them. And I just wonder in what sort of context, whether it arises at all, whether in the course of say, different subject matter, it might come up. I mean, for example, is sex binary? What about social justice theory? I'm just interested, really. I can't imagine that all kids in Michaela don't have to interface with some of these issues, political and ideological. And I just wondered how you as a staff and school deal with this.
Okay, Penny.
Yeah, I wondered if you could say a little bit more about tradition, because you talked about being a traditional school, and I suppose you can look at that in lots of different ways. But I've been thinking about what's the Scottish tradition, which, James, you might have thoughts on this. And I do think that culture that existed in the 1950s has a very, very long strand to the past, but particularly to the Scottish Enlightenment, which isn't taught in schools at all now. And it makes me think quite a lot about whether tradition is just about practices and things that we do and things that our parents did, or whether there's an intellectual tradition in Scotland which really placed value on knowledge and culture, and particularly on literature and history and poetry. I mean, when you think of who the key players were, that kind of valuing of intellectual life is something that's been lost, but also something that society and teachers feel a bit uncomfortable with, I think, partly because of the skills discussion, but also it seems elitist or something like that. I'm wondering how you think you can reconstruct tradition, not just as practices, but as, giving children a sense in relation to the history of Scotland or Britain, and giving them a sense of their place in the world. And is that also connected to the mental health problems? I mean, it's not just about telephones, is it? I think there's also this sort of sense of kids existing in a world which is entirely in the present, where we don't have a relationship to the past, but also they're very pessimistic about the future because of the messages they're getting from the outside world.
Great. Okay, there's a lot there. You might probably can't deal with all of it, but anything that you want to throw into that, Catherine?
James, did you want to answer that last one?
I'm sorry, I was very enthusiastic there. Yeah, is my short answer. That to the Scottish tradition, I mean, there's a very simple way of talking about what we mean when we say tradition, which is the sense of kind of like what I know, Catherine, you described them as small c conservative values. The idea, duty to others before yourself, respect your elders, the sacrifice for the whole rather than prioritizing the self. And they're rooted in a bit of a kind of Western Christian tradition, but they're also held by a lot of people who wouldn't personally feel tied to that. I do think one of the tragedies, but also one of the amazing opportunities about Scotland is that it has quite an unbelievable intellectual tradition, but also an intellectual tradition that is sort of the opposite of elitist, because it basically what's the prevailing idea that ran through Scottish society? And I don't think you can separate this from not just the Scottish Enlightenment, which was caused by it, but also the Scottish Reformation. It's the idea that if you're a parent, your fundamental duty is to do everything you can so that your child knows the word of God. Now, you can view that from a religious point of view, but what that means is that you are given dignity by your relationship with words, and that words are what changes you, and that it's what you aspire to have a free and enlightened life. So it's like I told this story once to Catherine. I don't think anyone found it that interesting. I was being a bit pompous, but it's true. So I grew up round the corner from Burns Cottage. Robert Burns' father took a second job. He was a farmer. He took a second job as a labourer laying track so he could give his son a tutor in French and in Hebrew. And so people look at this idea of, the lads of Perth's kind of tradition of working class people who pull themselves up, elevate themselves by their education. Like Wanlock Head Miners Library is the oldest miners library in the world. These are ordinary people with no money, but where it's kind of the point of Burns, a man to man for all that. The honest man, though he is poor, is king of men for all that. And what the thing is that stems in a cultural tradition that we sort of we've allowed to die off, and the consequence of it is that we kind of sometimes I worry we insult ourselves slightly to not say that if you learn nothing else from reading Burns or reading Walter Scott or reading anything, it's the idea like this is the cultural inheritance of every single person of this country. I don't mean this from a politically nationalist point of view, but I think that's something to be like very proud of. That's something to be really embraced. And what Katharine and Michaela do very well in a British, in a very much a London English context, is the idea that like this is your right, and it doesn't matter if your parents were born abroad. It doesn't matter if maybe you don't have a lot. You grew up in a council estate. This is your right as a person of this country, and this is an amazing thing. It's not just that it's going to help you get a job or go to a good university. Both those things are great. It's that it connects you to something that is good for the soul, because great books and thoughts and the best that's been thought and said changes who you are, and that is your kind of the privilege of being a teacher is to give that to a kid, and you might not know where they go with it, but you know what it does for them. And Scotland's story, I mean, I'm very, very biased, but I think it's that, you could argue we were the first fully literate nation in the world without being a wealthy nation that was based on values. This is why you got to embrace values, I'm afraid, Stuart. You're going to have to just give him a big hug and say, I'm coming home, because like that's what it was based on. And that's the only way back. You have to embrace that way of thinking about education and that passion. Catherine, I'll leave you to the other questions, but yeah, Penelope, I don't know if that addresses what you're talking about, but there's no other way of viewing the tradition of Scotland honestly, and I think it's a great thing that we could do for kids, and I'm very, very passionate, overly enthusiastic, as you can maybe infer. Sorry, Catherine, I'll leave you to the other ones.
Yeah, so Stuart, the idea of being an individual, I mean, well, kids, some of them are shy, some of them are loud, some of them are fast, some of them are slow. I mean, obviously they're all individuals. They don't all go off and become the same thing. I don't know, they're all doing various different jobs. They go to different universities. Some of them don't go to universities. Some of them become plumbers. Some of them become bankers. I don't know. I mean, some of them become revolutionaries. Some of them become dentists. They're all different, obviously, because they're all inner city kids who've grown up in the West, it's impossible for them not to be individuals. What is very difficult is to get them to have the sorts of values that will allow them to live lives of dignity. I think it's a sign of success if they're all able to live lives of dignity. We shouldn't be thinking, oh no, we need some not living lives of dignity so we can have variety. Oh no, we need some of them to end up on the dole so that we can have variety. I mean, obviously, I want them all to be able to fulfill their dreams. I mean, that's a good thing, isn't it? So, yeah, I don't believe in. Yes, we definitely want some of them being illiterate, and we definitely want some of them being enumerate so we can have lots of variety. That seems mad to me. And Jenny, I don't think it's the role of schools to be involving themselves in discussions about, things that they don't know much about. When I hire my maths teachers, it's because they're maths experts. When I hire my history teachers, it's because they're history experts. And this idea that all these teachers who are experts at a particular subject should then be educating children in, gender theory and critical race theory and so on is just mad. You've got some 23-year-old just out of university who knows all about maths, and yet she's going to teach them about critical race theory. I don't really understand why that suddenly lands, in schools. It shouldn't do, but that's not our expertise. And so our children understand that, and our children, You know, they just wouldn't. We don't talk about those things. You know, it's not appropriate.
Right. Okay. Diane, you're too late.
Well, Stuart, before we finish, I was going
Yeah.
to suggest that maybe James puts his email in the chat, his email address, because I know that he's only just recently moved back to Ayr, and it would be nice if you know all these other teachers and so on here in Scotland on the call were able to have access to him. So there's his email address if anyone wanted to get in touch with him. It'd be nice to, well, for him to just meet some other like-minded educators.
They're like my mum.
Yeah.
I'm just hoping James can make friends, you know.
Absolutely. Well, I was going to say, if there's anything we can do to help, and I absolutely mean that, do get in touch with us. This is an odd one, but I've also got a friend who lives in Prestwick. He probably wouldn't be up for it, but he did used to play table tennis for Scotland. So if you're looking for any sports stuff, and he's retired, he's sitting on his fat backside doing nothing, I suspect. So you never know, there might be something there, but definitely get in touch. We've also got a book club, by the way, which you might want to join. But that's a 2 bottle of whiskey every month night. But anyway, you get in touch with us, and we'll befriend you. I just wanted to throw in as well, just in case people don't realize this. This is how bad it is in Scotland. If you read the headship document by the General Teaching Council, it says this over and over and over and over again. Education in Scotland is for social justice. That's what it says. Doesn't say education, doesn't say excellence, doesn't say standards, doesn't say this, doesn't say a single word that has been spoken tonight, but it says it's for social justice. It's a shocking state of affairs. Anyway, okay, just to finish off, to remind people, please have a look at our manifesto. You can look at it on the Substack. We want people to be signatories to it, and we want people to critique it or comment on it, because we think we need to have a proper intellectual and communal discussion about what education is and how we can try and have discussions like this publicly in a way that is accessible to parents and can also involve academics and teachers as well. So we're very keen to do that. We have 3 pamphlets coming out very, very soon. One is on history, one is on reading, because reading standards are collapsing in Scotland, and the other one is looking at the sort of transgender inclusion issue in terms of schools, which is continuing to be promoted and is still part of the curriculum. So we've got 3 pamphlets coming out, and we are keen to both print these things and print the manifesto. And so we're trying to raise money. So you can also go to the Substack, and you can either pay for the Substack, or you can help us by leaving us a donation, which would be very useful. That's all I have. I could just say again, delighted to meet you, James, and delighted to talk to you, Catherine. I feel as if I know you already, because you are such a celebrity, but you are an absolute inspiration. Your school is incredible. If you didn't exist, I wouldn't believe it was possible. So I think what you've done is just absolutely magnificent, and I hope that James has as much success, or even a fraction of the success as you've had up here. So thank everyone for participating today, and thank you for speaking with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. It was lovely to meet you all. Really nice. It's always great to meet like-minded people and see so many of you, actually. It's wonderful. You must all, when I do launch Strictly Education, you must find it on YouTube, and do come to London and come and visit us at Michaela. We'd love to have you. Just sign up on the website.
Yeah, great. We will be reviewing your books on our Substack now that I know they exist. Anyway, great. All right. Thank you all.
Take
Good
care
night.
then.
Bye.
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 Bye.